My name is Tim Counts. This is Communication 110, speech number 4. Note cards I'll be using for today's speech. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing pandemic, I will not have an audience. June 24th, 2016, the Washington Post reported that in Great Britain, Google searches for "what is the EU" and Brexit had tripled. This was 8 hours after election results showed that Great Britain had gone out and elected to leave the European Union, commonly known as Brexit. The economic impacts of this decision were felt not only in Britain, where the British pound lost significant value overnight, but throughout Europe and the rest of the world, some of which we're still dealing with today. Voting is a civic duty and a social responsibility. Some of the folks who were interviewed in that Washington Post piece said that if they had done some more research and known a little bit more about what they were voting for, they likely would have made a different decision. Elections are very important. We've got one coming up in the United States in less than 90 days. And I want to talk to you about elections and why it's so important that we all go out and participate. The presidential election that happens every 4 years, like the one that's upcoming, everybody's relatively familiar with. We've got midterm elections every 2 years after the presidential elections that are highlighted by United States congressmen and senators. But there are local elections that happen on state and even smaller levels that happen every year. Sometimes there are multiple elections every single year, whether it's a primary or special elections, whatever the case may be. In all of these elections, there are local officials who are being elected or re-elected. Folks like state senators, state congressmen, mayors, aldermen, city councilors, school board members, even judges and lawyers that are all being elected. And all these names are going to show up on the presidential ballot. You'll fill out in a few months during the presidential election, but also during the midterms and those local elections. And these lower level politicians can have a lot greater impact on our local communities than the folks working in Washington, D.C. But elections have more than just officials. There are also referendums, propositions, amendments to state constitutions. All of these issues you will find on the ballots whenever you go for election day. And it's important that we get out and vote so that our voice is heard on all of these issues, not only who gets elected, but some of the issues where the general public gets a say and not the legislators. And because it's so important that we're getting out and the voices are being heard, let's look at who's going out and voting right now. According to Syed in 2019, during the 2016 presidential election, only 60% of registered voters actually went to the polls. In a second, we're going to talk about the difference between eligible and registered voters. But right now, let's talk about how many people are actually going. So 60% during a presidential election. It'll probably come as no surprise that during midterm elections, that number drops to about 40%. And during those local elections that we were talking about, only about 30% of registered voters actually get out and vote. Green and Gerber in 2019 told us that of the eligible voters under the age of 25, only 55% of those are registered. So if only about half of them are registered and only about half of that actually go and vote, the demographic of eligible voters under the age of 25, only about a quarter of all of those people are going out and helping make decisions that shape our communities and our nation. These numbers got to get higher so that demographic and that generation's voice can be heard and reflected in the elected positions. Gaius in 2017 told us that homeowners are far more likely to go vote than those who don't own a home. Now, this is important. People who are in a position to own a home are in a much different financial and stable situation often than people who cannot afford a home. Those voices and those folks need to be represented in their legislation, in their local offices and officials. Again, the local district attorney is probably going to have a much greater effect on local lives and impact socially than folks working in Washington, D.C. So all these elections are important, and the people who are out there voting really make a difference. And that's what I want to talk about. Let's circle back to registration and eligibility. Now, Rappaport and Dione in 2020 explained to us what is known as universal voting. A lot of other countries do this, and even some states like North Dakota participate. And what that is once you become eligible, which in this country is you turn 18, you're a U.S. citizen, you're eligible to vote, you're automatically registered. There's not another step that you have to go through. In most states, the other 49 states, you have to go and get registered to vote. Some places that's easy, some places it's not. But either way, it's a barrier to getting folks the ability to go vote and have their voice heard in these elections. Let's talk about possibly why that is. The people that are elected and in position hold a great deal of power. That same Green and Gerber article I mentioned earlier, they told us that after the 2000 and 2016 general elections, where Republicans won really big, within a year there were major changes to the tax codes. Now that impacts everybody across the nation. So who's in position and who has the power can make a big difference. But let's talk about taxes for a moment while it's been brought up, because that tax money gets used to fund social programs, right? So the people in power allot that money based on what they want. So whether education is priority or police, fire departments, infrastructure, wherever they find a priority, that's what they're going to fight to take those tax dollars and allot them for those programs. So it's important that we find the politicians and the people running for office who match our personal priorities and where we want to see things funded, and vote for those folks to get into office. It's important. That's how our voice is heard, by finding the person who's going to fight for what we need in the legislature. Beyond just allotting tax money, though, there's a lot of other things that go into being an elected official. You work through things like immigration reform, minimum wages, foreign aid and assistance, military, almost every aspect you can think of, day-to-day life or the nation in general, or the state or your local community. These folks have a hand in how we are represented. And so it's important that the elected officials represent equally the constituents within their area. Voting sends a message, whether you vote or not. Unfortunately, not voting sends the message typically that you don't care, you can't be bothered to participate. But voting is very important. Again, we've got just under 90 days until the next general election in our country. So I implore you, it's important. Go out, do some research. You've got time, not a lot, but you have time. Learn who's running for local offices, because there's a lot more than just who ends up at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Learn who's running for your state senate, your state congress, your local school boards, your local judges. Do some research into these folks. Find out what they stand for. Find somebody who matches the priorities that you want to see in your community, in your state, and in your nation. It's important. You have the chance to help author and narrate the next chapter in your community and in our nation. Or if nothing else, just go get a sticker. Thank you very much.